Passa a palavra.
Passa a palavra.
Passa a palavra. Passa a palavra.
Falemos de arquitetura. Harry Wolff lançou o convite e Robert McCarter aceitou. Com este arquiteto que projeta e escreve, historiador e professor de arquitetura na Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts, da Universidade de Washington, em St. Louis, daremos início à segunda série de Passa a Palavra Falemos de Arquitetura. Será ele a guiar-nos através do Unity Temple, edifício projetado por Frank Lloyd Wright entre 1905 e 1908 para a Congregação Unitária de Oak Park, Illinois. Interessa-lhe falar de um arquiteto que inspirou e influenciou de forma determinante o curso da arquitetura e daquele que é considerado o primeiro exemplo de arquitetura moderna religiosa a ser construído nos Estados Unidos da América, mas também de uma obra paradigmática do processo de projeto de Wright. Aqui, neste lugar de oração, onde é clara a profunda compreensão do ideário unitariano que o próprio Wright professava, a consciência da importância do espaço interior, a vivência dele esperada e os materiais utilizados fundem-se, e dessa fusão resulta a forma do edifício. São estes os elementos que validam a realidade do construído, consequência de uma visão sintética que modela a massa sólida e monolítica do exterior, marcada pela pedra e pelo betão que se agarra à terra, em contraponto à leveza, ao calor da madeira enaltecido pela luz em tons de âmbar, filtrada e suspensa da cobertura. A impressão de recolhimento que este espaço interior subtilmente insinua é, afinal, o princípio e o fim último do projeto, quando tudo se transforma num convite a esse habitar do lugar. Dedicado à experiência fraternal e íntima do divino, o Unity Temple desdobra-se e volta-se sobre si próprio, multiplicando camadas e limites numa unidade indiscernível entre espaço e forma. Robert McCarter vai-nos revelando a geometria pura e perfeita do quadrado e do cubo, o sentido sempre presente da proporção que o caracteriza, e assim nos convida a fazer parte da Assembleia, a embarcar nesse navio sagrado para uma travessia onde não falta sequer a companhia inspiradora das palavras do Walt Whitman. Foi com um pequeno livro sobre Frank Lloyd Wright, oferecido por seu tio artista, que Robert McCarter decidiu tornar-se arquiteto. O desejo cumpriu-se. Concluiu a sua formação em 1982 e desde então tem vindo a construir um percurso dedicado à prática da arquitetura em paralelo com o exercício continuado da escrita e do ensino. Foi em 2009 nomeado um dos 10 Best Architecture Teachers in the United States. Tem mais de 2 dezenas de livros publicados, desde logo sobre algumas figuras referenciais como Wright, Scarpa ou Kahn, e um longo rol de artigos e participações em obras coletivas. Recebeu múltiplas distinções, tendo sido um dos convidados para a 16ª Bienal de Veneza. Quanto à arquitetura que pratica, também ela está em consonância com a perspectiva que tem guiado o seu campo de análise e investigação, uma abordagem ao processo de projeto em íntima relação com a experiência do habitar.
Hello, my name is Robert McCarter. I'd like to talk to you today about Frank Lloyd Wright's Unity Temple. But before beginning, I wanted to preface my remarks with some comments having to do with my approach as a practicing architect, writer, historian, I suppose, and a teacher of architecture. And the remarks have to do with Wright's importance also to the emergence of modern architecture and also the emphasis, in my opinion, on the interior space as the primary determinant of his architecture, which of course was then perhaps passed on to architects such as Louis Kahn and others down to today. So my first comments have to come from my book called The Space Within. Throughout human history, and particularly in the modern period, interior space and its experience has served as both the beginning, that is the initial inspiration for the design of architecture, as well as the end, that is the final purpose of architecture, as it is evaluated through our inhabitation. Since the beginning of the modern period and continuing today, pivotal discoveries in architectural design may be traced back to a generative ideal of intimate interior experience, and the quality of interior spatial experience of the inhabitants may be shown to be the primary determinant of the architectural design process, as well as the means of appropriately evaluating a work of architecture after it's built. The emphasis on the primacy of interior space and its experience as the origin of architecture was also present at the very beginning of modern architecture. Frank Lloyd Wright, whose work inspired and initiated what would later be called modern architecture, believed that interior space and not exterior form was intractably bound up with the direct experience and presence. Wright said that the architect's principal task was to build the room, the simple room, which he also called the space within, an insight that he first articulated during the design of Unity Temple in 1906. Wright later noted, "The interior space is the reality of the building. The room itself must come through, or architecture has not arrived. Architecture not alone as form following function, but conceived as space enclosed. The enclosed space itself might now be seen as the reality of the building. The building now became a creation of interior space in light. This sense of the within, the room itself, I see as the great thing to be realized." End of quote. In holding that the interior space, as he said, must come through, that the exterior must be molded to contain and present the interior space, Wright argued that the interior space must take shape prior to the exterior form. Architecture must first be conceived, as he said, as space enclosed. So now I'd like to take you for, shall we say, a walk around Unity Temple, which was built in Oak Park, Illinois, in the United States from 1905 to 1908 by Frank Lloyd Wright. Unity Temple, which is the name that Frank Lloyd Wright gave to the building he designed for the Unitarian congregation of Oak Park, is the earliest example of a modern house of worship in the United States. Grounded in Wright's deep understanding of Unitarian faith and in his shared belief in the ideal of unity, Unity Temple returns the practice of worship to its beginnings. Dispensing with the symbols traditionally associated with the exteriors of places of worship, Wright focused instead on the interior, the space within, transforming space, geometry, material, and light in order to make a place where a common faith might come into presence. Unity Temple is first seen as a cubic concrete mass standing solidly on its corner site, with only the only openings being the high clerestory windows shadowed by the overhanging roof, and no readily evident means of entry. The prolonged entry sequence, involving 7 turns, both outside and inside the building, and passage through increasingly dimly lit, low and narrow spaces, incrementally compresses us, such that when we are finally released, rising up into the sanctuary, the room appears to be brighter than the out-of-doors that we just recently left. Our initial impression is that the space, acting as a kind of sacred vessel, has condensed and concentrated the natural light that has fallen into it from above and been captured within its walls. The ceiling above the central cubic space is opened by a grid of beams into which are set 25 square colored glass skylights. And on the outer walls, clerestory windows run the full width across the tops of each of the 4 balconies just under the outward projecting roof. With the exception of the thin 6-inch or 150 centimeter wide slits of glass that separate the 4 corner stair masses from the outside walls, light only enters the sanctuary from above. There are no views out at eye level, and light is filtered, colored amber, and made geometric by the patterns of the leaded glass. Walking around the space, we soon perceive that the deceptively simple plan of Unity Temple, a square with a cruciform set within it, is ordered on a rigorous system of proportion, determined on both exterior and interior by the measurements of the sanctuary space. The central space of the sanctuary is 33 feet or 10 meters square in plan, a 1-to-1 proportion, and close to a cube in height. The arms of the cruciform entrance passageways below, and 2 levels of balconies surrounding the central space, are double squares, 1/2 the size of the sanctuary space, 16.5 feet or 5 meters deep by 33 feet or 10 meters wide, a 1-to-2 proportion. In both the plan and the section, the 4 double square secondary spaces are gathered around and open into the central sanctuary space, geometrically dependent upon it as the center of the cruciform volume. The 4 square outer corners, which contain the stairs, are 11 feet, 3.3 meters across, that is a 1-to-3 proportion to the main room, and anchor and bound the composition. Our experience of the space is characterized by the pure, perfect geometries of square and cube that Wright employed to shape it, a constructed form that builds perfection into presence, an appropriate space in which to worship God. As Walt Whitman wrote in Leaves of Grass, chanting the square deific, out of the one advancing, out of the square entirely divine. In Unity Temple, the cruciform in square floor plan employed by Wright results in the congregation facing each other, more towards each other than towards the pulpit, and no one is farther away from any other person than 66 feet or 20 meters, which is the width of the space, which is also exactly twice the dimension of the central 33-foot, 10-meter square space. In our experience, we find that the proportions of this cubic space, its generous and even illumination, and its resonant acoustics all facilitate the question and discussion of Unitarian worship services, allowing all to be recognized and heard clearly, resulting in a sense of intimacy and almost familial relationships with our fellow inhabitants. The room is characterized by a synthetic conception of unity, resulting from a fusion of space, material, and experience. The material of which the building was constructed, cast-in-place reinforced concrete exposed on the exterior and cement plaster coated on the interior, is critical to this character, and in our experience, the monolithic nature of the building and the lack of joints or subdivisions contributes to its unity. Also critical to our experience of unity in this space are the various ways in which soft, warm oak wood is used to counterpoint the hard, cold concrete. We open wooden doors in entering, we grasp wooden handles as we ascend the stairs, we are given light by wood-framed hanging lamps, and we sit on heavy wooden benches, and we are surrounded by thin lines of wood trim densely interlacing every concrete surface. While on the exterior, Unity Temple is a heavy, solid, earthbound mass of stone-gray concrete. Inside we find the exact opposite, a space defined by concrete rendered as light, floating, free-spanning, pastel-colored planes, seemingly collected and held in place by the light falling from above. All the interior surfaces appear to have been folded to construct the enclosure, and a network of thin, dark oak trim articulates the continuity of surface around corners and between ceilings and walls. In our experience of this space, there is a constant play between monolithic, massive planes and thin, nimble articulation of wood stripping that joins the planes, and the continuous folding of the interior surfaces constructs a similar continuity, a weaving together of the space within. In this room, the 4 massive corner piers create re-entrant corners that are folded so as to point inward, so that the space is split, folded, redirected back in on itself, resulting in a multiplication of implied layers or boundaries, and rendering impossible any single interpretation of the room edges, producing a true unity of space and form. Every surface, from the scale of the entire room to the hanging lamps, is rigorously proportioned, folded, and unfolding from the square and the cube, so the geometry seems to come alive within the space. Thank you.
Passa a palavra. No próximo Passa a Palavra Falemos de Arquitetura, teremos como destino a Argentina. Quem se seguirá?